This typical delta gradually progresses in the downstream direction A close look at the top-set slope in slow motion clearly shows a laminated deposit of finer particles. The thickness of the top-set deposit decreases in the downstream direction as the foreset slope of the delta is approached.
Over a long period of time, the accumulation of sediments displays clear stratification, with fine particles on top, coarse particles in the middle, and fine particles on the bottom. It is important to understand that the chronology of the formation of the deposits depends on the layers and not on the strata.
Isochrones correspond to the interface between successive layers, not strata. The thickness of strata is determined by the changes in sediment transport that occur in non-uniform flow.
Let's now consider two particles in the delta. Particle A in the upper strata and particle B in the lower strata. Particle A deposited at a time T1 before particle B. Particle B in the lower strata therefore deposited after particle A in the upper strata.
Increasing the flow depth while keeping the discharge and the supply of sediment unchanged results in more complex sedimentary features. Substantial deposits accumulate with features including deltas, dunes, and ripples at various stages of development. A dried delta, viewed from the flume sidewalls, displays clear stratification characteristics in terms of superposition of deposits with similar particle size distribution. A cross-section is cut through the delta to examine the primary features of deposits of sediment mixtures carried out under steady flow and a continuous sediment supply. The cross-section displays a clear superposition of strata of fine particles in white and coarse particles in black with clear lamination. Looking at the cross-section of superposed strata, it is tempting to conclude that the strata correspond to successive sedimentary layers, that they result from discontinuous sedimentary periods, that each strata is younger than the one underneath it and older than the one above it, and that all points of the same strata have the same age.
This stratification experiment invalidates these hypotheses because these strata are not identical to successive layers. Moreover, clear stratification is observed under a continuous supply of heterogeneous sand particles.
Why is this important? Well, quite simply, because strata have been used to date sedimentary rocks and the fossils in them for over 100 years. And now, for the first time ever, there is experimental proof to show how strata form. And it is quite obvious that strata cannot be used to date either fossils or rocks. In fact, the fossils in the bottom strata could be younger than the fossils in the top strata.
Here you see some sea creatures which live at different ecological levels. A heavy influx of sediment arrives and they all get buried. Eventually, If no air gets to them, they could turn into fossils. Obviously, those buried in the top strata are the same age as those in the bottom strata, as they were buried in the same layer of sediment. Then another heavy layer of sediment arrives, and more sea creatures are trapped. But what is more important is the ones at the top of the previous layer were buried before the one in the bottom of the last layer. So the one at the top here is older than the one at the bottom.
Let the director of the research program explain.
La théorie de l'évolution se base
Evolution
sur la
theory
croyance
is based upon the belief that a succession of fossil species in a scale of geological time demonstrates that evolutionary progress has taken place.
entre les espèces.
As we have just seen, however,
Et comme cela a été
and as we have
reproduit
shown in the
par
laboratory,
les couches
layers of incoming sediment have been wrongly identified as being strata.
identifiées à des strates.
The scale of geological time and the chronological succession of fossils have been calculated on this mistaken belief that strata are successive layers of sediment. A single layer of sediment can sort itself out into parts of many strata. So the position of fossils, rather than showing evolution, merely indicates the distribution of marine species which lived at different depths. The theory of evolution is therefore unsupported by geology.
n'est donc pas corroborée par la géologie. Il y a une autre question.
The next question is, if the creatures fossilized in the rocks show no evolutionary sequence, could they have all lived together at the same time? Since we now know that rocks don't need time to form, just enough sediment, there appears to be some reason to believe that they could have all been living together. What we see is an immense graveyard encircling the Earth of hundreds of millions of fossilized creatures who could have all been victims of the same catastrophe. The very fact that their remains were buried in vast quantities of sediment which has become rock, and that this kind of rock is only made by water, strongly indicates that the catastrophe was a cataclysmic flood that covered the entire Earth.